Ubisoft is making some pretty major changes to its upcoming slate. This is primarily in response to the reception to Assassin's Creed Shadows, which the company was apparently really impressed by. This is reported by Eurogamer, who were listening to the investor call that Ubisoft as a company really did, and it was really intriguing. So the first bit of information that we need to know about is that apparently they have internally delayed a whole bunch of games that were planned to come out in this fiscal year or in the next fiscal year, and essentially push them to 2026, 2027 and beyond. So that means initially, after now Assassin's Creed Shadows is out, their 2025 is going to be quite light in terms of releases. We're still going to get a few games, but they're going to be the smaller games. They're going to be stuff like, ideally, if it hits its deadline, the Prince of Persia remake, the Sands of Time remake, and a couple of other titles. I think there's a Division spin-off coming as well that might be an extraction shooter. I don't know.
Oh boy, we need more of those.
It sounds likely for that franchise, I suppose. But this was described by CEO Yves Guillemot as allowing them the time to focus on their top brands, which they have been banging on for a long time, and apparently focus on the quality of their single-player offerings and their live service offerings. Although it's still a little bit unclear exactly what has been pushed and what was about to be released, Eurogamer says that, quote, through an investor call listened to by Eurogamer, Ubisoft boss Yves Guillemot suggested the impacting titles came from the publisher's top 5 brands, those being Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, The Division, and Ghost Recon. Now, we already essentially knew that a new Far Cry was in the works, Far Cry 7. We've been hearing rumors from reliable people about that game for like the past year. The idea that it might be somewhat time-based and stuff. We've done videos that you can check out about that. That, to me, always seemed like the next one that they would launch, but it seems like we're going to wait a little bit more than that. But they are here. The company also said that this, like I said, this has been inspired by the success of Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was the second fastest selling Assassin's Creed game behind the last one, which I'm forgetting, Valhalla. And that obviously benefited from dropping during the pandemic, where player numbers were up across the board for consoles. So Assassin's Creed Shadows did very well, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. And that was reflected not only in the sales, but in the critical response as well, with the general consensus being that the 6-month delay or whatever it was that it received helped the overall quality, and it was one of the better Assassin's Creed games in some time. So the idea is that they're going to do that for the other games in the pipeline. Got some other points, but my worry initially is, like, they've done this before and it didn't really work. About just before 2020, after the release of stuff like Immortals Phoenix Rising in the run-up to like that era, they did the same thing where they said, we're going to delay a bunch of internal games to get us back on track. It didn't quite work. I want to be optimistic. I do think Ubisoft's games recently have been an improvement on their past even decade of work, but I've seen them try to do this soft reset before and it hasn't quite kind of come through. Just based on this, what do you think about like this approach?
So the first thing that I felt there was that we're seeing a general trend among various video game publishers at the minute of shifting to their core brands. I think this is a big thing that Warner Brothers were saying, earlier in the year and last year as well, being like, well, we are only going to be like Batman and Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings and maybe something else in there, I don't know. And so on that end, it's a little bit frustrating because I'm like, this is again an overall narrowing of, across all facets of entertainment media, we're only honing in on stuff that has a pre-built audience rather than trying to craft something new. But at the same time, I think that Ubisoft's upcoming slate, again, as much as I'm not interested in Far Cry, is probably one of the most interesting positions that the company's been in for a long time. I know that we have Assassin's Creed Hex coming out, which is right up my alley. Is a kind of like a witchy supernatural type game. I forget there was another Assassin's Creed, wasn't
there? Or was that the one that just came out?
Was that I can't remember.
They had 3.
I think they announced it along with Mirage, didn't they? So it was Mirage, Hex, and what became AC Red, AC Shadows.
That's it. Yes.
So yeah, I'm curious to see what Hex is going to look like because of all the Assassin's Creed games that have come out recently, that's probably the one that I'm going to be most interested in because, no offense to Ubisoft, but Ghost of Yotei completely made Shadows obsolete for me and I didn't check it out. Rainbow Six and Ghost Recon, we both have a long history with these franchises.
Yeah,
the late 2000s and the mid 2000s and the early 2000s, a very fun time for me as a gamer because I grew up with the Tom Clancy games. And you think of like, Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is one of my favorite games of all time. The Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter and Ghost Recon Advanced Warfighter 2, both amazing games. And then, the Rainbow Six Vegas games and obviously the Rainbow Six titles before then. Obviously, I sunk a lot of hours into Rainbow Six Siege. So many goddamn hours across my university experience. And obviously, they've just done that new rejig of Siege where,
Yes.
they've brought in a lot of different features. I really, really hope that if they're talking about a new title for this IP, that we're getting something that is more in tune with its spiritual DNA and that it isn't janky. Because even though Ghost Recon Wildlands and Breakpoint had their charms,
Yes.
it's another one of those where you feel that Ubisoft jank and you feel as if you're having to make your own fun to make it playable. In the same sense, it's one of those where a lot of the time I found playing Ubisoft games over the last 10 years is that I've had to play them in a certain way because the mechanics don't naturally engender a enjoyable way of playing. Like if you want to play Ghost Recon Breakpoint and go for a kind of quasi milli-sim vibe, you have to role play it.
Yeah.
You have to kind of commit to it that way, and that isn't necessarily encouraging a set play style. It's looking past the veneers that are on both sides of your FOV. And so, if they are going to do a new Rainbow Six game, I hope it's more in tune with the old Tom Clancy DNA, and I also hope that they haven't forgotten about that Splinter Cell remake.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't even think that was mentioned in the entire call, but I always think Rainbow Six is a fascinating case study for them because Yves Gilmour later on in this call, according to Eurogamer, essentially said that their most successful pillars are in this order: Assassin's Creed, Rainbow Six, and then Far Cry. That's in terms of the metrics for the player data that they have in terms of sales and stuff. And it's like, we haven't had a new Rainbow Six game in 10 years, and it's still their second highest moneymaker, essentially. It's still the one franchise that they have, apart from Assassin's Creed, which is this world-dominating thing that got a bloody Hollywood movie that no one remembers after it. That, like, it's still in the public consciousness. Like you said, it's just got Siege X, this kind of reboot with a new engine, some updates and stuff. But do they have anything else planned for that brand? Because, again, like you said, we've had long histories with Rainbow Six, with Ghost Recon. Ghost Recon feels well overdue a proper return, and not in the form of Ghost Recon
Future Soldier, which was that was the kind of the Gears of War type thing.
I didn't mind that, actually.
I mean, it was fun, but it was more of like a Gears of War type cover-based shoot. And then there was Ghost Recon Frontlines, which was they were trying to do the
as the battle royale extraction shooter thing that was announced and then immediately cancelled. But
wires crossed with X Defiant, which was also that was Tom Clancy as well, wasn't it?
It was. I think it was maybe initially, and maybe they took it off. They've had a problem with marketing their games, especially their new games, for a while now. But yeah, Ghost Recon, I think that has suffered because, like you said, it eventually just became another Ubisoft game that wasn't quite as technically solid as some of their other ones. And if they're going to do a Ghost Recon going forward, I think the response to Frontlines especially has to suggest that if you're doing a Ghost Recon game, it's a Ghost Recon game for a reason. It's not an X-Defiant. It's not just a Tom Clancy shooter. You've got to play to its strengths. You've got to play to the core in that way, which, to be fair, Rainbow Six, even though it has gone absolutely mad with Siege and the content packs, it did initially gain that success for staying true to an element that was central to its identity in a way. But if your second, like, most profitable, your second biggest franchise is a game that is getting quite on now and is maybe a little bit not hostile to new players, but has its player base, and it comes with so much baggage, even with the soft reboot, right?
It would take me a while to get back into Rainbow Six Siege today. Yeah, and I was in Diamond for a little bit. I'm just saying, I was up there at the upper echelons. I was dining with the kings.
And then this guy whooped my butt the first day we had a match together.
Those mouse and keyboard people, though, they were really annoying on console. Yeah, I don't know. I find myself so nostalgic for an era of Tom Clancy that just has not been there for a very long time now. I think it's mad that Rainbow Six Siege has been a successful multiplayer title for as long as it has been. Not because the game is bad, it's really, really good, but largely because I can't believe that Ubisoft haven't looked at the model for Siege and haven't applied it to Spies versus Mercs or Splinter Cell. This would make so much more sense for them to do as a if you were going to do a standalone multiplayer game, Spies vs. Mercs and Splinter Cell lends itself way better to that concept than Rainbow Six, which was historically a single-player and co-op focused tactical shooter. So I hope that there is an overall diversification in terms of genres being straddled here.
Yeah.
But knowing how Ubisoft operates, I think these delays and the more time being given to focus on their core pillars and brands, I think it is another code phrase for let's just do what we know is safe. We'll keep Ghost Recon in an open world, quasi open world context. And just try and iron out the kinks, which is going to land for some people. Wildlands and Breakpoint were both very successful in terms of sales. I want to have to emphasize that part. But it's not the Ghost Recon that I grew up with, and it's not the Ghost Recon I'm really looking for.
I think there's a point that I want to follow up on there, but I kind of want to go back to that idea of like, why haven't they managed to replicate the success of Rainbow Six? And I wonder if the answer is just they can't. Obviously, the team on Rainbow Six has been able to continue the initial boom that game had and are doing a good job by all accounts. Obviously, I mean, even just in terms of sales for keeping that game around, but the other teams haven't kind of been able to figure out what made it so successful in the first place, and that is why we've had stabs at something similar like X-Defiant and some of the other kind of mad Ubisoft crossover multiplayer games that they've put forward, or announcing something like Ghost Recon Frontlines, but they haven't been able to recapture that. And if I was the team on Rainbow Six, I think I'd be feeling a bit smug in that regard.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think of Siege has had so many technical issues over the years. I think 3 years into its lifespan, we got Operation Health. It might have even been 2 years into its lifespan where Ubisoft spent an entire year basically fixing all the bugs, trying to make hit detection better, trying to improve all these different glitches that were making the game a miserable competitive experience at times. But you look at stuff, the thing that switched me off instantly about X-Defiant was that it did not feel good to play. If you look at something like Battlefield, Overwatch, Call of Duty, they're very responsive, ergonomic games, and Ubisoft sometimes struggles with the technical aspects of that, and that is vital to get right in a shooting context. Whereas you think back to Splinter Cell Blacklist, which again, I'm staggered they haven't re-released that on modern consoles because it plays really well, it's aged really well. Spies vs. Mercs in that game, while not as good as the traditional offerings, I think it kind of peaked with Double Agent, which was just a very, very fun time. It still looked and played well. There was no technical jank to it. Everything felt responsive. And I just feel like maybe that kind of gameplay style would paper over the limitations that Ubisoft has to work with, which again, you can argue that they shouldn't have those limitations because the company, the size they are, they should be able to make a product as polished as a Call of Duty or a Battlefield game that is 6 months down the line after it's released. Sorry for this, it's catching strays now.
Got to clarify it, right?
But yeah, that's kind of my whole thing here. Overall,
I do think that's something to take away from Assassin's Creed Shadows, because say what you want about whether it was justified its length or if the story came together in the end or whatnot, it was and plays better than any other Assassin's Creed, and it feels like a big jump forward in a way that wasn't really visible between Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla. They played very similar, and it felt like, in my opinion, they were a little bit behind the curve of the competition and what the competition was doing in either open world games or action games. Whereas Ubisoft, to their credit, when Watch Dogs first came out, for instance, the movement in that game, the hacking and stuff, it felt technically like, I don't know, a team flexing its muscles.
Smooth, lucid, yeah.
It was polished. It was a direct competitor to some of the biggest games on the market in terms of just game feel. And Ubisoft, for me, have lost that, both in terms of the actual gameplay mechanics and also in terms of their graphical fidelity. It's just it's they're good-looking games, but you always get the feeling like this should be better. It should be more polished.
There's got to be something to do with animation quality as well, because I just feel like the quality of the animation overall, the mocap. Sometimes I know you'll see in Shadows there's lots of gorgeous mocap work in there, lots of fluid movement, but by and large, I think sometimes the scripting makes it seem really, really janky and kind of kind of guttural and fraying. Whereas if you think back to Assassin's Creed 2, Assassin's Creed 3, obviously that game has its critics, but again, you could put that with any other AAA game of the day, and it would.
Oh yeah,
it'd be completely, So it is interesting. You're right that Ubisoft has fallen behind in this regard, and we know obviously years of allegations of crunch culture, of toxic workplace environments. That's all going to contribute to worse quality games at the end of the day. So. Yeah, hopefully changes on the horizon and they're taking the right lessons from Shadows.
It's sadly, Ewan, I've got a bad addendum to all of this because that does sound like it could be promising, but it's also important to note, like you said, Ubisoft has been restructuring quite a lot over the past year or two. They have, like everyone else in the industry, been making layoffs, and that was quite, in my opinion, coldly referred to yet again in this
asset recalibration.
Pretty much, yeah. There's more cost cutting that's on the way, essentially. Eurogamer points out that they've cut 200 million euros worth of costs over the past 2 years, which includes headcount, which includes employees, restructuring studios, and it is important to note that Yves Guillemot has committed to cutting another 100 million euros over the next 2 years, and this restructuring, again, follows the strategic partnership that was announced, I think, last year, maybe the start of this year. It feels like a long time ago, but it's probably not, between Ubisoft and Tencent to overlook their biggest franchises.
And there's also the hostile takeover concerns as well.
That's it. And it's an interesting thing, I think, because that partnership is to focus on their core brands and to put more money and time into them, like this conference suggests. But to me, I'm like, if you take Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon over to this kind of like new subsidiary, what does the Ubisoft of old do? What happens to those smaller games in their eyes, like Splinter Cell, like The Division? Does that mean things are going to get even narrower if you focus on this subsidiary and the rest just are kind of working on other stuff?
The super wild thing about all of this is that it's all self-inflicted. Like Splinter Cell was huge, and then it went away.
Yeah.
The Division, huge, justifiably huge in places. I know it's kind of fun, but it's huge, and it's kind of, again, gone away for a little bit.
Watch Dogs,
even though the controversy of that first game, the sequel built upon that, and then we get something kind of weird with Legion.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like Ubisoft are really bad at maintaining franchises. So to say that, we're going to focus on our core experiences, okay, make sure that you're building yourself back into a healthy position. But also, it's kind of wild how much has gone wrong in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
From a position of complete industry dominance in some respects to, really clawing to try and, make sure that they're still getting a podium finish.
Yeah, that does. I think you're absolutely right. Like the idea of desperation, the idea that they're just like really trying to recalibrate and it's not quite working. I do sympathize to a certain extent. Ubisoft is so big; it must be so tough to right that ship in a efficient and quick way. It's going to take years. It might even take decades to see the results of any changes that are made right now. But I've said this before when we've talked about stuff like Star Wars Outlaws last year, I do think they were making progress. I do think their games were getting better, not at the rate that maybe even fans wanted to see, but they were moving in the right direction, and hopefully this restructuring continues that direction and doesn't totally do a 180 and we're in for another 10 years of pain.